Since the beginning of the miniature hobby, people have been wanting to take real life things and shrink them down to put them into their projects. I guess that's kind of the whole basis of miniatures, and this includes themselves. And while technology hasn't exactly caught up to our imagination from the 1980s, what I'm going to be reviewing today might just be one step closer. I have a box here that contains the Creality SHRUNK Lizard. This scanner can take 3D images of things in the real world and put them into the computer. From there, they can be manipulated, put into any scale, and then 3D printed. This scanner was sent to me for free to review. However, I am not sponsored, and I already told them I would be giving my 100% honest opinion on this item. So today I'm going to be scanning a few things, see how it works, and decide if I think that this will be useful to those of us in the miniature hobby, either now or maybe even in the future. We'll see. Sidebar, I know there can be some division between those who are full-on dedicated to hand-making things and those who are really excited about incorporating more technology into the miniature arts. I myself am somewhere in the middle. I really love making things by hand and I don't ever see that changing, but I also like to find technology that's helpful and gets me to where I want to get a little bit faster. I also know there can be a price barrier, so I'll be taking that into consideration when I give my final thoughts. I myself love to make things that are as cheap as possible or free from recycled materials, but sometimes a machine is worth the purchase if it will help you in the long run. The setup for the scanner was pretty quick and easy, especially when following the guide that's inside of the box. I also wanted to note that it was suggested that I buy this scanning spray to go along with the scanner. The scanner was given to me for free, and the scanning spray I bought myself. Was not expecting it to be about $50 per bottle, so hopefully I can use it pretty sparingly. The box contained the Creality scanner, some cords to go along with it, a tripod to get it up off of the surface, a little turntable that has a top that has some grooves cut into it. I'm guessing this is so that the scanner can kind of figure out what part of the item it's scanning by lining it up with the grooves along the top of the turntable. Everything plugged in really nice and easy, and it immediately started working alongside my computer. Mr. Technology downloaded the software for me and it immediately recognized the scanner. I had this sock chair sitting nearby, so I decided this would be our first scanning victim. It has a really interesting, unique shape and a lot of texture because I made it out of a real life size sock, and the feet are made out of beads, so I was interested to see how much of that the scanner would actually pick up. The tripod allowed the scanner to be in a horizontal or vertical direction, so we played around with that for a little bit, trying to decide what the best way to scan would be. While I'm working with the scanner, Mr. Technology was running the program on my computer, which was really helpful to have two people do this or else be really close to your workspace. However, after I got the gist of it, I was able to run it all on my own. It was just nice to have the help as I was getting started. I was really surprised at how well our first scan went. Without us really knowing much about the scanner or tweaking anything, it got a pretty good picture. We soon realized that it works off of moving the item many different ways so the scanner can pick up as many different sides as possible to put together a 3D object. I did want to note that this scan was taking place without using the spray, so I wanted to keep track of when I was using the spray and what techniques I was using and how the scanner worked. You can technically use this scanner without the spray, however it has a hard time with shiny surfaces and black surfaces, and that's when the spray is going to be necessary. I didn't really know that at this point, and so I tried it on the chair. You can see on the bottle it does say that it will evaporate over the next 24 to 48 hours, and there's no cleanup. The spray essentially puts a white film over the surface, which makes it easier for the scanner to pick up all the textures and forms that you want to see in the computer. Once you have all of the scans that you think you'll need to make up the complete 3D item, you want to do something called align. You can align things by hand, which is what you just saw us trying, but the auto align feature works really well. If you're scanning a unique shaped item and you got good scans, most likely it will be able to put the item together for you on its own. It's also pretty easy to remove any of these floaty bits that end up outside the model, but there's also an auto remove noise, and that works pretty well too. This program also has texture mapping, which means it was taking pictures of my chair, which is why you can see the hand-painted flowers that I painted on that chair so long ago on this chair. It was honestly a weird feeling to see something that I had hand-painted in the computer. It was really fun, and I just kept looking at it, kind of amazed. I wished it was color. I don't know if there's a setting for that, but it came out black and white. It did seem to have a hard time picking up the texture of the braid that's over the arm of the chair, but once the texture mapping was laid over the top, you could see it a little bit better. I watch people on the internet play indie horror games all the time, and so I immediately thought, how cool would it be to see something hand sculpted inside of a video game? And I think that's what texture mapping is for, because it's basically applying a picture of something that was painted. For example, I painted the flowers onto that chair. It's applied to a 3D shape that can then be put into a 3D environment. That's just really cool, in my opinion. I finished scanning the chair, so now I'm going to go on to something else. Miss Periwinkle, she's got really complicated wings, and I just think it'll be interesting to see what the scanner can pick up, so let's test it out. I could immediately tell that the scan of Miss Periwinkle was going to be a lot more difficult than the scan of the chair. She is much more complicated, but I wanted to give it a try anyway. I'm really all for pushing the limits as far as you can with new technology and new techniques, just to see what's possible. I also tried texture mapping on Miss Periwinkle so that you could actually see if she looked like herself, and the orange parts are where the scanner did not get a good picture of what image should be there, but overall I think it did a fair job. Then I decided to try the texture spray. This is what it looks like when it's applied. I wanted to get an up-close view of what the spray looked like because I want to compare it in a couple days to make sure that it's all evaporated like it says it's going to. We watched a few videos to see some other creators using the scanner to see what worked for them, and one of the suggestions was to scan with the lights out, so we decided to try that with Miss Periwinkle and with the spray, and these results were actually not that different than the first results. And this is how she looks as a 3D model. We didn't do the texture mapping this time, but if I were to print her out, the texture mapping part wouldn't print anyway. Miss Periwinkle was a little bit more complicated to scan. She has a lot of fabric, which has a lot of folds and little fringy bits on the end because I didn't hem anything. She also has slight movement in her arms, so when I was moving her around into different positions to get a better scan, her hands and arms might have moved a little bit, which makes it harder for the scanner to align. But honestly, it still did a pretty good job for how complicated she is, and who wouldn't want to see Miss Periwinkle coming at them in a horror game? You might have noticed that the turntable that I'm putting everything on is a little small. Now you can scan things that are bigger than the turntable, so I wanted to test that out as well. If you've watched my channel for a while, you might know that I love to put a single shoe into each one of my projects when they're finished. I do have a few that I haven't done that on, but I thought, how cool would it be if I could scan my actual shoes that I wear in real life, shrink them down and put them into my project so that the artist's shoe is inside the miniature. I grabbed a few shoes to test out, but this ended up being harder than I thought. And that's because I have a lot more black shoes than I thought, so it was kind of hard to find ones that would work. And because the scanner has a hard time with shiny items and black items, this shoe was just difficult all around. But as you can see, it does go outside of the turntable space, and as it turns around, it just kind of scans whatever's in that area, and it holds on to the points that it previously scanned, which is what you can see on screen. Here you can see an example of how it completely ignored the black parts of the shoe and the interior parts of the shoe because it was just really dark. And so that really wasn't going to work. The program does have a feature where it will kind of fill in the gaps, so I wanted to try that out. I rescanned the shoe with the spray, and so I was able to get the heel, but it still couldn't do the inside. So when it filled in the gaps, it just completely filled in the shoe. So I tried scanning a lighter color shoe with a lighter color interior, but it still had a hard time figuring out what was going on in the shadows. I tried to bring it into Blender, but I just don't have enough skills to try and remove the stuff that's inside. I really do think the shoe idea is possible, and I'm probably going to look into it a little bit more in the future, but I need to be better at my 3D sculpting skills. So while the scanner is really cool, it does require some knowledge on manipulating things in a 3D space on the computer. The program itself comes with some ways to do that, but it's editing kind of node by node, if I understand it correctly. I might be wrong, but you can pull it into other 3D sculpting programs. I'm just not knowledgeable enough to know how to fix it. There is a hand scanning feature that allows you to scan things a little bit bigger, so I wanted to test that as well, and I'm doing that using a roller skate, which is a lot bigger and more complex. How cool and detailed would this be if I could scan it and shrink it down into 1/12? I didn't do the best job filming this, but what you can't see is off camera, I'm holding the scanner in my hand while I'm slightly turning the shoe around on my own turntable. Holding the scanner in your hand allows you to move it a lot more around the object and get better views. However, you still have to watch the computer screen and make sure you are the correct distance away from the object. If you get too far or too close, it will let you know. And if for some reason it stops keeping track of where you're at, it will just stop scanning completely. It went okay, but you can tell that it's another case of needing some 3D cleanup skills that I don't currently have. I got this wild idea to scan a Polly Pocket. I have a small Polly Pocket collection from my childhood and a few that I found as an adult. And I thought it'd be really fun to shrink one down and put it in the garage in the Beetlejuice house, so I decided to give it a scan. It had a hard time with the windows and the balconies because just like the shoes, this is a space that it's hard for the scanner to really look inside and see what that area looks like. So it did come out a little lumpy and bumpy in the end. One of the best scans that I was able to get was based off of a mass-produced dollhouse chair. This one. My thought behind this is that if this was a rare dollhouse piece of furniture, which it is not, if for some reason it was broken or the leg was missing and I could not find a replacement for it, I could possibly scan the chair and isolate the leg and then replace it. That scan came out the best in my opinion, and so I was kind of ready to wrap this video up and give my thoughts. And then I remembered my words from a past Beetlejuice project. I hand sculpted a sandworm for one of the Netherworld scenes, already knowing that I was going to have to make the Saturn scene with probably multiple sandworms. It was very intricate, took a lot of time, it was difficult to paint because of all the intricacies, and I remember thinking, and maybe I said it, if I find the clip, I will put it here. Here is the finished Beetlejuice sandworm, and I'm very nervous that I have to make several more of these for the sandworm area of the base. I'm not sure if I can do some 3D printing or what, but making several more of these is going to take some time. So that's what we're doing. We're gonna scan the sandworm. I'm a little suspicious this isn't going to go very well. First of all, because there are black stripes on the sandworm, so I'm definitely gonna have to use the spray. Plus there are some deep crevices inside of the mouth that are gonna be really difficult for it to pick up. So we'll see how it goes. I decided to start scanning him on the turntable because that is what had worked really well for the other items. However, once it was going into the computer, I could tell that it just really wasn't going to get a good angle into the mouth, and I was afraid to move it around because it was on the turntable. And so it got a general picture on one side. It didn't get much of the fin, and then if you turn to the back side, it really was just trying to fill in the gaps, and I wasn't happy with the scan at all. So then I decided to scan it by hand, and instead of holding the scanner, I decided to hold the miniature. Luckily, he has a long neck and I was able to keep my hands out of the scan. It's so shaky and all over the place because I was having to look behind myself at the computer screen to make sure I was the correct distance away from the scanner. Here's how it looked on the computer screen, which was honestly pretty funny. It does look like, I don't know what it looks like. It looks like a sandworm just coming at you in some kind of digital form. But I was pretty happy with what I was getting, and I was just crossing my fingers that this was enough to get a solid 3D object. And it was. The teeth are kind of missing. It had a hard time picking them up, but they were black and white painted teeth. But there is enough there to really see what this is supposed to be, and I was pleasantly surprised by the results. That went so much better than I imagined. Now it's time to 3D print some of these scans and see what the results look like once they come off the printer. That's going to be what's really important to me because I make physical art in the real world. It looks really cool in the computer, but I need to see what it looks like if I'm going to print it out and put it into one of my projects. Now it's time to print. This is the printing song. It isn't very long. Hey! While the printing song may be short, the printing time was about 8 hours on my printer. But I'm pretty happy with the results, and from here it's looking pretty good. I made sure to wash them off in an alcohol bath and then cure them so that we could take a look. I've got all the prints with their correlating objects here, so let's compare and see how the prints actually came out. Our first print was the sock chair, and I did have a printing issue. This had nothing to do with the scanner. It just didn't print the little back legs for this chair, but I wanted to see how close it was looking. And by the way, I did print a lot of these at half scale just because I didn't want to take up too much resin when printing, but I did want to see how they would look when they were shrunken down. So I wasn't sure in the computer how much it was picking up this braid, but now that it's printed, I really can see it. So I'm impressed with that. And you can even see the sock texture on the side, which I think is really cool. So this is why it's important to look at the prints as well to see really how much texture is there, because it was a little bit hard to tell on the computer. Next up is the delightful Miss Periwinkle. And again, this was another one I wasn't quite sure how much detail was getting picked up. But I'm pretty excited with the 3D print results, especially for this being a print that had a lot of fabric folds and the wings being made out of really thin toilet paper. I am honestly very impressed. Now, if this was printed at 1/12 scale, I think it would look a little bit more lumpy and bumpy, but because I scaled her down, the details are looking more fine. I also want to point out there are a couple fingers. I don't think the fingers scanned very well because her arms could move. But overall, I am so excited that you can tell this is Miss Periwinkle. I'm not quite sure what project I'm going to put her in, but on Facebook, someone mentioned she looked like a weeping angel, and she totally does now that she's in gray. Time to look at the one shoe print that I did go ahead and print out. I thought this was a really cool result because this shoe just kind of curves because of the type of shoe it is, and I've worn it for many years, so it just has this natural curve to it. And that came out in the print, which I think is like a cool detail to get because I'm sure some of you have shoes that do this. And a lot of times when you buy a miniature shoe, it is completely flat and you don't have that little bit of realism that comes in. And also I'm hoping the camera will be able to pick up the cool texture on the bottom. And you can even see the little marking that's on the sole of the shoe on the 3D print, which is pretty cool. Now it's time for the Polly Pocket scan. I did want to note that the spray is not really coming off as well as it has on the other items. As you could tell, the sock chair, Miss Periwinkle, the spray has evaporated, but it's really holding on to this roof. And I'm sorry if you can see like the dirt it's like built up over the years. I did not clean it before I sprayed it. But everywhere else it seems to be evaporating, but the roof, it's holding on pretty tight. And here is the tiny little resin print of the Polly Pocket house. The printer had a hard time with the tree just because it's kind of like an umbrella and it couldn't really see inside the canopy. And so it just kind of made a blob form around the tree. But when it's this small, it doesn't really matter. What I thought was cool is that you can see the cat on the back of the roof, and you can also see the little tiny bricks on the chimney. So I printed this so that it's about 1 inch tall, and I think it'd be really fun to paint it and put it into the Beetlejuice basement. The scanner did have a really hard time with this base. I don't know if it's because it was flat, but I just could not get a good scan of it, even after I sprayed it. And so it's kind of like broken on one side. I'm probably just gonna cut this part off. And again, that's one of those things I think could be repaired if you're good in a 3D sculpting program. You could just put a slab and kind of replace that piece that the scanner didn't pick up. If you look closely into the windows, you can see that it just kind of put some blobs in there. And the way I explain this to myself, at least, is this scanner is kind of playing the most complicated game of connect the dots. So have you seen those really crazy connect the dots that the teachers give you when it's a sub day and they don't have anything else for you to do? And it looks complicated and kind of mind-blowing and you don't think you'll ever get through it? Well, this is that, but it's in 3D space and it's just kind of floating there. So the scanner is like putting in all these little dots where it thinks there is a piece of this whatever you're scanning. And then when you go to process the item, it's kind of connecting all of the dots, trying to figure out what the 3D object looks like. So when you don't get a really good scan, that's why some of the fixing that the program does looks a little bit wonky because it's missing dots. It's missing that information and it doesn't know how to connect it all together. So when you have an item like this where it's open and there's nothing really for the dots to bounce off of to the scanner, it just kind of guesses and puts a blob in there. One of the items that scanned the best was this mass-made chair, and I printed this in 3 different sizes so you could really get a look at how it scales up and down. Here's the daddy chair, here's the teenager chair, and here's the baby chair. It's a little chair family. What I found really interesting on this scan in particular is how well it picked up the cushions, and in every print you can see this little tag that's on the bottom of the chair. So you can see it on the big one, the medium one, and you can kind of see it on the baby one. There were some printing supports that were there, so that's why it's kind of looking a little weird. I thought it was interesting that it could pick up that much detail to see the little tag. However, it struggled to pick up the carving that you can see at the top of the chair. And my thought for this is maybe because of the whole connect the dot thing, that there were just dots here, and so it filled it in more than it probably should have. I did spray this chair with the spray, but I didn't focus really hard on this carving part. So perhaps if I had done that, the carving would have come out a little bit better, but I'm not sure. So this is a 1/12 scale, this is a 1/16, and this is a 1/24. Well, I'm pretty sure this is a 1/16. This is what the chair printed as without me changing any size. So I scanned this chair, and then this is what printed directly from the scan without resizing. So it is a little bit smaller than the original item. I wasn't sure whether it was going to print it exact or not. Turns out, not. And just last week, I had someone asking me where they could find 1/16 scale furniture. It's not very common. I don't think it's made very much anymore. So in theory, if you had a bunch of 1/12 scale furniture and you wanted to make something in 1/16 inch, you could scan it and then print it down at the scale you really want. In theory. I mean, it depends on how well the furniture actually scans. I also want to put a little blurb in here to say that no, I will not be reselling these. If I were to ever sell any of my scans, they would be scans of my own original artwork. I don't think it's ethical to scan somebody else's work. Even though this is a mass-produced miniature, I just wouldn't feel right about scanning something somebody else made and then profiting off of it. Now, I feel okay scanning it for my own projects because I did pay for it and I do have the scanner and I'm paying for the resin to print it, but it's not something that I would ever put in my store. All right, moving on to the big fella. This is my Sandworm, And I have noticed that the spray is having a really hard time evaporating off of this. And this was covered in Mod Podge. So if you do end up getting a scanner and you do try out the spray to scan something that you sculpted, just know that it really likes to cling onto Mod Podge. It is starting to come off, so I do have hope that it's not going to stay there, but it's held on to this more than anything else that I sprayed. So this is the little baby sandworm print, and I think it came out so good, way better than I thought it would, simply because of how deep the gaps in the mouth areas are. As you can see here, it did fill in this smaller mouth pretty well with the blobs, I guess I'm calling it, to connect all of the dots. But honestly, I'm okay with that because I can just kind of paint it black and then highlight the areas that I want to look like the teeth. But it really picked up my sculpture pretty well. And what's exciting about this is I can make them in different scales. So for example, when I make my Saturn scene where there might be multiple sandworms, I can print one smaller more towards the back of the diorama so that it looks like it's further away. I can also take it into a program and mirror it, so I have a sandworm that's facing in another direction. So here are my final thoughts on the scanner. I wrote a list of pros and cons as I was working with it, so I'm going to go through those with you now. Pro, or idea of how you could use this, you could repair discontinued miniatures. So for example, this chair, if I was able to scan it in, isolate the leg, and I needed a leg for the other side, I could just mirror it, print it out, and repair my chair. You could easily change some of your already owned dollhouse miniatures into other scales that are harder to find. If you're a content creator or maybe a video game designer, you could easily scan in some real-world items and put them into your video games, especially with the texture mapping feature. I found the software to be pretty easy to use, self-explanatory, easy to download, and it was easy to set up the scanner and get scanning right away. This is a result of just 3 days of working with the scanner and getting some fairly good results. All right, so here are some of the cons. You are very restricted on the size that you can actually scan. I would say it would probably struggle to scan anything bigger than a watermelon. So I can't really go around scanning some of the bigger furniture items in my house. It has to be something that's already pretty small. There are some detail limits, especially if you're scanning something that has deep crevices, such as a shoe or something like Miss Periwinkle where there's lots of folds. And at that point, the program just kind of has to guess. So I think the best items to use are solid items that are smaller than a watermelon. And on that same topic, if you do scan some items that have crevices or detailed balconies like the Polly Pocket House, you will have to have the computer skills in order to sculpt them out. My computer did struggle with running the program. Now I have an older computer, but it is a pretty good one because I use it for video editing. I just noticed that it had a hard time with some of the scans, especially when they were really complicated or I was doing a lot of scans of a single item. There's also the con of it having a hard time with items that are black or are shiny. That means that you're really going to have to use that spray, and the spray is $50 per bottle, which is a lot. And speaking of cost, the scanner is pretty high in price, which most technology is. It's just something you would have to determine for yourself if it's worth your time and money and what you would specifically need it for. So I guess the final question is, would I suggest this to another miniaturist? If you have no other technology and you are wanting to get into technology, I would say invest in a 3D printer or a laser cutter first. You're going to get so much more out of those items for their price than a 3D scanner. 3D scanner was really fun. However, I did need some computer skills and I needed a 3D printer to even get some more miniatures out of it. However, if you are big into technology and wanting to make some really cool miniatures with scanning some real life items in, and you have the funds to purchase a scanner, honestly, I think it did pretty well. I think it does better with scanning larger items and making it smaller because the details look more impressive the smaller you go. I think if you were wanting to scan something really small and make it bigger, I think you would start to lose detail. So it just depends on what you want to make with it. Who I do think this would be good for is someone who's making very specific shaped parts, say for some kind of electronic device or RC cars or actual cars themselves, where you need something that fits a specific position, and you could scan that surface and then go in and make your own 3D parts that you could then print and install into whatever you're making. So all in all, I really enjoyed working with this 3D scanner. I'm excited to see where it might possibly go in the future. I think there's definitely room for improvement, but where it stands now, I came out with some pretty cool miniatures and solved a big sandworm problem that I knew I was going to have in the future, so I'm very thankful for that. So that's all I have for you today. I want to say a big thank you to Creality for sending me this scanner to review. I really enjoyed the process of learning something new, as I always do in miniatures. It's really exciting to see where technology could possibly take us in the future. I'm excited to be at least open to that, to see what could happen. If you want to learn more about the scanner for yourself, I will put some links down in the description so you can click and see what it's all about. And I just realized that I could totally make sandworm earrings, because I could just print two, like not this big, but right? I could wear my own sculptures on my ears. It's worth it just for that. For my non-tech enthusiast, I am making something by hand that will be coming out very soon because I've been making both these videos at the same time. I'm super excited to share it with you, so I will see you in the next video. Bye. Since the beginning. Since the beginning. With the toe and the heel, with the toe and the heel. I cannot say that phrase. 3D sculpting programs. There we go. And that's as far as my notes go. In Texas, you can't say toe and heel, field, toe and hill, toe. I don't want to hear any fashion judgments on my shoe choices. I wear what fits and what is comfortable and affordable.